Welcome back. Today I want to talk a little bit about the first plot point and how to structure it in your novel. And again, I get a lot of my notes, tips, and tricks from K.M. Weiland, Structuring Your Novel, or from her podcast series. So the first plot point is what takes your story from the first act and into the second act. And it's like a transition. It's not like the first plot point happens and then second act. It kind of covers the gap and does both things. The first half of it happens in Act 1, and then the second half of it happens in Act 2, and that is the reaction phase of the first plot point. And the first half of that second act is the second half of the first plot point, and then that spans all the way to the midpoint, so 25% to 50%. So your first plot point happens at 25% of your novel, the midpoint happens roughly around 50%, and then you have your first pitch point in there, which is a whole different video and discussion. Ideally, what happens is you have your inciting incident, which we talked about in the last video. You could check that out. But you have your inciting incident, and then your main character either says no to that call of action, or something externally around her says no to that call of action. What you want to have happen is the result of that first plot point is because of the no. Because the main character said no to the call to action, that sets up the events to be that the first plot point happens. So for example, you have a main character where they discover something, a really, really deep secret, and they choose not to delve into the secret, not to learn more, not to get involved. It's somebody else's life. They don't want to get involved in it. So they say no, and they have to push back against it, even, because they're like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. No. And then that other character that it's about their life ends up dying because the main character didn't look into it and didn't learn what they needed to protect the other person. That is a good example of, it may be contrived, but take this with a grain of salt. Okay, this is like an example that your main character says no to the call to action, and then something happens that forces them then to have to go to that call of action. So like the person dies, and now they have to find out about the secret. They have to like avenge the person, things like that. Okay. With all of this, I want to bring up the idea of GMC. So GMC is basically breaks down your story into scenes. And that's basically what a story is. That's what a novel is. It's a bunch of scenes interconnected, right? But it's not just like one thing happens, another thing happens, another thing happens. Scenes, and you might think of scenes like the chapter breaks or the chapters. A scene can span multiple chapters. One scene can span multiple chapters. What makes up a scene is that your character has a goal. They have this one goal, and say they want to go get bread from the grocery store. Okay, so your character wants to go get bread. They get their shoes on, they're dressed, they're ready to go. Then they can't find their car keys. So they can't find their car keys. Now this is an obstacle that they're facing. And it's an external obstacle. It could be internal. It could be, I'm not supposed to have bread because I'm watching my carbs, right? So they're fighting with themselves. Like, I want to go get bread, but I really shouldn't. So they, either way, can't go get the bread because of this obstacle. Either they can't find their keys, or they think that it's not the right thing to do. They meet this obstacle, and then maybe disaster strikes of some kind. And I know I'm not explaining this well, probably, but maybe their car keys are like really missing, or like they start throwing up. The idea of eating bread, I don't know, it's crazy, right? Then they have to come up with a new goal or plan. And either it's, we're going to call somebody to help us get new car keys, or call a taxi to go get the bread, or we are going to choose not to eat the bread and find an alternative because even the idea of bread is making us so sick, right? That is the idea of scenes in a story, the structure of how one thing leads to another. With all of that being said, right? So they have the inciting incident. They are trying to avoid the inciting incident. They have a goal, right? So whatever that goal is, it's probably to avoid the inciting incident, right? And avoiding the inciting incident becomes an obstacle because of the events that happened in the first plot point. And the first plot point has to be significant. It has to be significant. It has to be huge. It's something that the main character can't turn away from at this point. Now they have to go on this adventure. They have to change their lives and learn something new, or, you know, find something, or, you know, go on the first date, or, you know, all of these things. Something big has to happen that makes it impossible for the main character to go back living their lives the way that they did before. Another example that I want to use is the Great Gatsby. And this is challenging to use as an example, but it was the most recent full movie, other than Dune, but I wouldn't want to use Dune for this. Great Gatsby is the most recent full movie that I've watched, so it's clear in my mind. A lot of people argue that Nick Carraway is not the main character. I would argue opposite that. I think he is the main character, because everything that happens in some way or shape or form does affect him as a person. I mean, it drives him crazy. He started off the movie and he's like seeing a psychologist because he's just like, the events that he had to watch unfold change him as a person, okay? And change his psyche and the way he thinks about life and people. Okay, so he is the main character. All right, we're gonna stick with that as our theory, okay? Secondly, the events of what make up the first plot point, as I went through it and looked at it and decided what I feel like is the first plot point, I have looked up online and other people have different opinions. So I would consider, if you don't know the Great Gatsby, right? Okay, Nick Carraway moves into this little bungalow house next to this great big mansion that throws parties every weekend. And it's this guy named Gatsby. Nobody knows him. Nobody knows anything about him. There's all these rumors and secrets. And Nick avoids going to these parties. Like, he doesn't play any part of it. And he has a cousin named Daisy who is married to some other guy. And that's all kind of built up in the beginning of the movie, the book. And then Nick one night receives an invitation to Gatsby's party. And he, you know, they go on this narrative like nobody's ever received an invitation. People just show up. So he gets this invitation to the party, and he shows up at the party. You know, it's a party, and he's not like a big party guy. He's just kind of getting into the party scene for the first time. He just wants to like live his life. You know, he just wants to be like a normal guy. He wants to do his investment stuff or whatever. He's the money guy, selling stocks and bonds, I think. I don't remember. But he just wants to live his life. He just wants to be, you know, himself. But then Gatsby kind of ropes him into his life. Nick meets up with a friend at the party, and they run into Gatsby. Gatsby takes the friend, and they're like talking all night long while Nick is like lost in a daze in this party. And then as the party ends, she comes back out and she says something like, everything that they've said is true about Gatsby. It's all true, you know. And then Nick goes home, goes back about living his life. So the invitation to the party is what I consider the inciting incident. Okay. Some people consider the party attendance as the first plot point. I disagree, because he wasn't in Gatsby's life until the invitation. Like, he had no reason to go, right? And after he goes to the party, he can still go on living his life like normal. Like, he doesn't have to continue being Gatsby's friend, although he does choose to continue talking with Gatsby, goes to a couple of parties, but he doesn't have to. He's not like immersed. It's not something that changes his life. It's not, you know, he can still say no to Gatsby. He doesn't have to be part of Gatsby at all at that point. So that's the inciting incident. Then what happens is his friend that was at the party with him, she tells him that Gatsby wants him to invite Daisy to tea, his cousin Daisy, who's married. It turns out Daisy is Gatsby's long lost love. Like, it didn't work out for them, and then she ended up getting married, but she's still in love with him, right? And so Nick invites Daisy over to tea. Gatsby is there. He shows up because Gatsby wanted to form a chance meeting with Daisy because he wanted to see her again. That is the first plot point. That is where Nick's life is forever changed, because now he's friends with both of these people. Like, he's Daisy's cousin, but he's also kind of friends with Gatsby. He feels sorry for Gatsby. Gatsby's ultimately a very lonely guy, and all he really cares about in the world is he loves Daisy. And so he continues to be the bridge between the two of them, because she is married. She does have a child. Like, she finds it very difficult to drop her life to be with Gatsby, even though that's all she's ever really wanted, was to be with him, because her husband's an asshole. He's cheating. It's not good, right? And Nick, at this point, after this tea afternoon, he can't ever walk away now. He'd feel like a bad person. Like he'd have pressure from Daisy, he'd have pressure from Gatsby. Like, there is no way for him to walk away. And part of that is his own internal feelings of like, I don't want to hurt these people. Because Nick's a great guy. Nick's a good guy. He doesn't want to hurt these people. He cares about them. So he's never going to walk away now. Now he's roped in. That is the first plot point. Then after the first plot point, that's where you move into the event, like the tea afternoon was the event, right? After the first plot point, you move into the reactionary phase. And that's the reactionary phase of the scene. So Nick had a goal, just living his life, and then his obstacle was met. He had the obstacle disaster because he watched Daisy and Gatsby get together and still love each other. So that's where he now can't go back, can't turn around, and now he has to create a new goal for his life. And that's the other side of the scene structure of reacting and creating a new goal. That is the first part of the second act. That is what I have to say about the first plot point. I hope that made sense. I hope it helped. I mean, make sure, comment below if you have questions or other insights into what the first plot point is. I'm making these videos as I'm learning with you in depth about story structure, because I'm working on my own novel and other novels in the future. So I hope it helped. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you next time.